So Dudley's got revealed, which means we've got more Rising Nova support.
Stand up! Vanguard!
Hey Cardfighters, welcome back to another Cardfight update, and last Friday we saw some more reveals as we already discussed the new Hanzo and the new Batama support around it, but alongside Hanzo they also revealed the new Spike Brothers support, which are of course the new Dudleys. And in this video I want to take those Dudleys under the microscope and see what they can provide for Spike Brothers, and more importantly, Rising Nova, as that's the main unit or the main boss unit for the clan as we speak, at least in standard. With any further ado, let's jump straight into these cards, and we're going to start with the new grade 1, which is Dudley William. And Dudley William has the abilities Auto and Rearguard Circle. At the end of the battle that it boosted, cost, put this unit into your soul, choose one of your units, and move all of the force markers from your circles to that unit's circle. So this is similar to in grade 1 that we already had during the Bull Spike support wave, which I believe is Devil Snapper, which has somewhat a similar skill, only Devil Snapper I believe costs a counterblast and it puts the markers on the unit which that unit is boosting, and this grade 1 doesn't have the counterblast. In fact, it gives you soul, which is even more important with Bull Spike as it uses soul to move those markers around. And of course with Rising Nova copying those abilities, soul can be quite hefty as a taxing resource. But more importantly, this grade 1 can move them wherever you want. So this is a lot more flexible than what we had in the past, because either the skills that utilize it move the circles to themselves, or the unit must have the 4 markers and then move them away. Except for Bull Spike, of course, as he's the most versatile one. Now this grade 1 is as flexible and it builds up your soul, which is really nice. Now on top of that, it also has the ability Auto when rolled upon, you may call this card to the Rearguard Circle. This is a skill we have seen time and time again in Spike Brothers. Another good example is Offensive Punter, which has a similar skill. So it's basically another way to be a bit more aggressive in the early game. So it's a nice grade 1 for Spike Brothers. But as we're going to see with the new support with Dudleys, it's actually very fitting in the playstyle of those cards and might be a nice addition for the Rising Nova deck that utilize these Dudleys. Now as for the new grade 2, we've got Dudley Davie. And its abilities are Auto and Vanguard Rearguard Circle. When placed, cost counterblast 1. Search your deck for up to 1 non-grade 2 card with Dudley in its card name, call to the Rearguard Circle, and shuffle your deck. So this either can call the grade 1 we just talked about, Dudley William, or it can call the new grade 3 Dudley Lucifer. Those are the only 2 targets in standard for this card. And being able to call unit for counterblast 1, it's basically the average value that you're going to get out of it, so it's a nice skill. But as we're going to see with the grade 3 can refund the counterblast cost when paying a soul. So effectively, if you call the grade 3, use Soul Blast for this cost. And as we've seen with the grade 1, you build up the soul, so it's if you combine those 3 cards together, you actually can refund the cost all around. But it can also refund that Soul Blast cost with its own ability, which is Auto Rearguard Circle. Once a turn, when a force marker is put on this unit's circle, you may soul charge 1. Includes moving the marker too. So either you put them when you create a marker or when you move them around with either Dudley William or with something like the Death Heat Bull Spike support cards. So it's another way to generate soul, and as we just discussed, Death Heat Bull Spike and Rising Nova with the whole shenanigan plays utilize or uses a lot of soul. So having now the grade 1 that generates soul and this grade 2 that also generates soul, it's really nice because it means that resource will probably be not an issue. And as we just discussed with the grade 3 being able to generate counter charge by using soul, that means even counterblast or countercharging is even more useful for the deck. So resources will be less of an issue when utilizing these cards. So overall, Dudley Davie is a nice card. The only issue that I have with this card is that the target to superior call something is kind of restrictive, but at the same time it opens up a interesting line of play once we take a look at the grade 3. So let's take a look at that one, shall we? So here we have the new grade 3 boss unit, per se, that you could say for Spike Brothers, which is Demonic Lord Dudley Lucifer. And his first ability, we already discussed this a little bit with the grade 2, which is Auto Rearguard Circle. When placed by a card's ability, costs Soul Blast 1 and counter charge 1. So if we utilize the grade 2 and superior call this grade 3, As we stated, you can pay a Soul Blast to refund the Counter Blast you just used for the Grade 2. Now, I'm not too familiar with Spike Brothers with all the cards they have. I think there are a couple of cards in the clan that allows you to Superior Call units. A good example is the latest support wave that we've got for Rising Nova that allows you to Superior Call Grade 3 to the field. That can also activate the skill, so you could potentially refund those costs as well. The Grade 2 Rona, I believe, uses the Counter Blast, so it has the same interaction with Dudley Davie as with her, with this card that you can refund the cost and then turn it into a Soul Blast. So that's pretty nice to utilize your resource a bit more effectively. But now we get into the spicy part, because we are interested in its Vanguard skill, which can be then copied with Rising Nova. As its Vanguard skill is All-Down Vanguard Circle, when it attacks, cost Counterblast 1, and put a rearguard into your soul, draw a card, call up to one card with Dudley in his card name from your hand to the rearguard circle, and if your opponent's Vanguard is grade 3 or greater, that called unit gets power plus 10k until the end of turn. So this effect costs a counterblast, but generates a soul, and then you draw a card and you can call a new unit to the field. So that soul unit that you put into the soul, you basically get a new unit onto the board, and as soon as you call from hand, it might sound like a minus, but because you draw a card, effectively you go +1 on advantage overall, as that draw card can potentially be called to the field, so your hand size is the same, and a unit where you want to potentially call the unit to goes towards the soul, so you actually generate soul as well, which then can be utilized for its rearguard skill that can then generate counter blast as well. It's kind of maybe confusing to follow, but effectively this effect, when utilized completely, when you can superior call unit to the field, you just generate resources. And interesting enough, you don't have to call a unit. So you can just utilize it as a draw effect in the circumstance that you cannot call Dudley, as that's the main issue with this card. It specifically needs to call Dudley, so if you don't have the grade 1, grade 2, or grade 3, you cannot multi-attack. But, that said, this is another effect that allows us to multi-attack. So if we combine this with Rising Nova, we can use Rising Nova to copy this skill and go up to 4 attacks in a turn. But if we then combine that with Spiking Cyclone, which could restand a unit, you could effectively gain 5 attacks. But then you can ask yourself, what's the point of doing that, as most of our the grade 2 and the grade 1 works really nicely with Bull Spike with the moving markers, and if we utilize Cyclone and Lucifer, then we're not gaining benefit of that interaction with Death Heat Bull Spike. But there's a solution to that issue, because we don't have to utilize Spiking Cyclone to actually gain 5 attacks in a single turn. Because what we can potentially do is use this skill to superior call Dudley from our hand, and if that Dudley that we superior call happens to be the grade 2, we can use its unplace effect to superior call another Dudley from the deck onto the other side of the column, and thus having 2 standing units in the front row once again after they already attacked, and thus gaining 5 attacks in a single turn. And if we have Death Heat Bull Spike onto the board, then we can keep moving those markers between those units. And as soon as one of those units is a grade 2, means we can use its skill to generate even more soul. So we can keep using all those abilities in rapid succession together if we utilize all the Dudley cards together with Death Heat Bull Spike together with Rising Nova. But the only issue that I have with this card is that it's very restrictive, and it's highly likely that you won't get a multi-attack off of this skill because you're restricted to specific Dudley cards. Now granted, it can interact with himself because he can call himself, and if you call himself, you can basically get everything for a net 0. Because its skill to superior call something costs a counterblast, but generates a soul as you put a unit into the soul. Then if you call him to the field, you soul blast that unit that you just put into the soul to counter charge. So your soul count stays the same, your counter blast usage stays net 0. The only thing that happened is you called a new unit to the field, and you drawn a card, and potentially that unit gained plus 10k power. So for free, you could potentially gain an extra attack out of nowhere, which is a really nice bonus, but that's not super consistent. But it's at least something that Spiking Cyclone can provide. Spiking Cyclone will always cost you a counterblast to gain that extra attack, but the upside to Cyclone is that if that unit that you're going to restand already has an inherent power buff, you can still gain more advantage off of those extra numbers that the unit already has. That can be the case with Dudleys as you keep superior calling new units to the field. Now there's one more thing that might be of interest for Spike Brother players, and that's the fact that this Grade 3 can also be utilized with General Siegfried. Because General Siegfried's main ability as a Vanguard unit allows you to superior call a unit from the deck that has the same name as the unit onto the field for a counterblast, and you put the unit into the soul. We already had a Grade 1, a 7k I believe, that when it's placed onto the field by an ability, you get the counter charge. The bonus effect of that was that you could keep reusing as you keep generating the counterblast every time that you superior call that Grade 1 to the field. So you could keep using it because you shove it into soul, you counterblast. You shove it into soul and you counter charge again. And you keep doing it unless you run out of copies of that Grade 1. But in the process, your Vanguard gains a 10k power buff every single time you do that. But now with Dudley Lucifer in the mix, this is another card that synergizes nicely with that, because Dudley Lucifer, when it's superior called by an ability, you can soul blast one to counter charge. And because you shove that other copy into the soul and then superior call it onto the field, you can soul blast the other copy of himself to counter charge, and you can keep doing that without losing any resources, and you keep giving your Vanguard an extra 10k power. So you could then sit at a Siegfried that has plus 60, 70, maybe 80k power, depending on how many times you can resolve these abilities. So it's an interesting thought. I'm not saying that it is effective, but it's a thing that Dudley Lucifer brings to the table for Spike Brother players. Now, do I think that this will revolutionize the Spike Brother deck at all? I'm not so sure, because yes, it provides to potentially 5 multi-attacks instead of the 4 with Spiking Cyclone. But Spiking Cyclone, the advantage of that card is that it's really consistent. You don't need extra pieces, you just need to have him on the board and you have that extra attack. With Lucifer and the Dudley engines, you need multiple cards, and you're dependent on actually having those Dudleys in your hand. And if you don't have them, it basically becomes a counterblast, lose a card for a draw. So you use a counterblast to cycle, which is definitely not worth it. But that's about it. But the upside is that if you run the Grade 1 and potentially Grade 2, it does make your Bull Spike effect a lot stronger and potentially more consistent, that you can generate the soul to keep using it turn after turn after turn, especially if you have 4 to 5 attacks every single turn. So there's upsides, there's downsides. I think for Spike Brother players, they have to figure out if this card is good enough for their deck and it brings something new to the table. I'm kind of in the middle on this one. I think it's okay, but we probably need more Dudley support to make Dudley Lucifer actually playable and useful, especially if we're utilizing it with Rising Nova, and that's more cards that aren't Dudleys that we're playing in our deck. But that's also about everything that I want to talk about these new Spike Brother cards. Overall, they're not a lot to discuss, as they're just typical Spike Brother cards, or some interactions here and there, but mainly it comes down how well can Rising Nova abuse these effects. And it's alright, but at the same time, I'm not a Spike Brothers expert. There are plenty of other people out there that know way more than me and have probably a better opinion about this. So if I might overlook something, or you think I'm missing the point here, let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below, because maybe there's something to this card that I'm totally not getting here. So let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. As always, this video has been brought to you by lovely patrons over at patreon.com/VanguardInsider. You guys are amazing. If you want to support the channel or everything that's happening on the channel, you can simply go to patreon.com/VanguardInsider and become a patron today. But with that said, I'm Mr. Time Leap, and I see you guys in the next one.